Keith Hayes is a Colorado native who started playing with his dad's Lionel trains at a very early age. Many summers reading Model Railroader and studying the plans therein resulted in a career in architecture. Bill Wardell introduced Keith to SN3, and when it came time to build a layout, the subject was going to be a freelanced Colorado Pike. Choosing Leadville, Colorado as the subject of the first town has led to modeling the C&S between Leadville and Breckenridge, Colorado in the 1930s. Keith lives in Denver with his wife and 3 cats and regularly posts progress of the layout on the C&SN3 blog. Keith has also been on the advisory board for the Colorado Railroad Museum for the past 6 years and has been a trustee of the Colorado Railroad Museum for the past year. So Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you if you want to share your screen, and away you go.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody. Several months ago, the crew asked me if I knew anybody that could do an update on the Railroad Museum and what's happening there. And I realized we'd done some recent presentations to folks and talked to Paul Hammond, the executive director. He said, hey, take the slideshow and you can talk about it. A lot's going on at the Railroad Museum, and we're excited about the future. We're still steaming on. One of the things that's happening is that we try to have a train ride available every day of the week or as often as we can. We're slowly outgrowing the Goose. That's been the stalwart of operating train activities. I hate to start this show with COVID because I think that's all. We're happy to see that in the rearview mirror, and it's becoming something dim in our minds, I hope. But it was a big impact on the Colorado Railroad Museum and the museum industry in general. The Colorado Railroad Museum actually survived and managed to thrive in spite of COVID. And part of that was they took advantage of a couple paycheck protection programs. They were able to continue doing the preservation work very carefully with safeguards and masking and so forth. And we also were able to apply for and receive some shuttered venue operator grant applications, and those funded several of the projects that we have ongoing right now. Just talking about the Railroad Museum or the museum industry in general, I share these statistics. Paul Hammond shared them last week. We're working very diligently to develop some of the core documents in the American Alliance of Museums recommend and participate in a survey of museum directors. And one of the things we found out just last week when the survey was published, 2/3 of the responding museums have not yet rebounded to pre-pandemic attendance figures. That's a really big deal. 25%, 1 in 4, have fewer staff than before the pandemic, and 1 in 3 have had their net operating performance decrease since 2019. The Railroad Museum, and you'll see in some of our statistics I'll share, is doing really well. Among other things, right at the onset of the pandemic and through it, we got 20 back under steam. It's on the museum property. It is a great locomotive. If you've not been to the museum to see 20 in operation, it is just an absolute cutie. In my mind, it's one of the most perfectly proportioned locomotives I've seen. And I know there's some folks that are going to maybe want to arm wrestle me over that. Also, a tremendous opportunity presented itself last year. The museum worked with the Cumbers and Toltec for the Iron Horse Roundup in Antietam. I think that was last August. And on the way, it visited Cripple Creek, where it was 20 was originally a Florence and Cripple Creek locomotive. So trying to really instigate some outreach in other parts of the state. The facility, the tour went really well, and I think that it certainly has opened the door to, nothing's really planned definitively right now, but I think that if there were opportunities for other equipment to tour around the state, that would be entertained and probably take place. We're also growing the operation. I'll talk about this by in the future, but we have enough tonnage of equipment that we need to operate. Those passenger trains are getting longer and longer in the loop, and so we needed to get a bigger piece of equipment. We did that. Statistics wise, in 2019, and we throw out the 2020 statistics because they just don't matter, but we were pushing 60,000 visitors in 2019, 1,600 members. This year already we have 31,000, and so that's through June 30th. If you double that, we're probably going to exceed the 57,000 of 2019. Membership is down, and we're working on that. And if you're not a member and you're on some kind of mailing list, you're probably going to get a solicitation to become a member, and I would encourage you to belong. So the museum's doing really well in terms of admission, doing really well in terms of admissions and revenue. Wanted to share a couple items in terms of Day Out with Thomas. That's not really a Railfan event. It's not intended to be a Railfan event, but 9,250 folks attended this in 2022. And this is huge in terms of building those young rail fans and appealing to the broad community in Denver as well. Second event that we have later in the year is Polar Express. The museum's been acknowledged by the folks that licensed that event that it's one of the best in the country, if not the best. We had over 10,000 attend in 2022. This event sells out in days after we release the tickets. And the important takeaway for all of you is 50% of the revenue in 2022 came from Thomas and Polar, and that revenue gets plowed back into preservation. So these are fun events. They're themed events. They reach out to the general public, but they also generate a heck of a lot of money that we take back, and we plow that back into preservation, acquiring new gear, improving the facility, new exhibits, and that sort of thing. Something else, another revenue source that those of you that aren't in the Denver metro area are not familiar with likely is the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. Thomas and Polar launched the Railroad Museum from, there are 3 tiers, 1, 2, and 3. Don't want to belabor it too much, but tier 1 is the biggies in Denver, the Denver Zoo, the Museum of Nature and Science, the Symphony folks. Tier 3 is all the little itty bitty museums and dance and theater organizations. The museum's in tier 2, and that it's really based on membership or attendance, and we're a big player in that, and that is responsible for 12%. It's a tax that everybody pays in the Denver metro area, and so that's a significant source of revenue for the museum as well. So using all of that, we've been doing a lot of stuff. We're working on improving accessibility. We have put this path in between the main museum building and the pavilion that's over there behind the trolley stop, and that's getting extended in the coming year down to the Roundhouse. Believe it or not, the Roundhouse is over 20 years old, and it was time for a new roof, so we got a new roof on that. And along the way, the contractor bought us some new electrical conduit and things as well. So the Roundhouse is in great shape. Moving forward, it's good for another 20 years. The existing museum building, we've been remodeling that for some improved office space for the staff, and they're very appreciative of that. We've been working on site work as well, and they're adding some fence, and we're doing some drainage improvements around the library building. This is very important to keep those archives safe. We also acquired some Manitou and Pikes Peak equipment that the Manitou and Pikes Peak deemed surplus as part of their I don't know how you describe it, recogging a couple of years ago, and so several new pieces came up to the museum on short order, and we moved those to an improved display location on the hill, uphill of the library. I shared earlier, we've had increased train sizes, and particularly in order to protect the Polar operation, we've purchased this locomotive from the Durango and Silverton, Big Al. It does need some new wheel sets, and so those are scheduled to be ordered next year. But we're very excited to have this piece of equipment on the property to support those operations. And within the museum itself, we're working on new lighting upgrades in that space, new LEDs. And you can see on the left there some exhibits where we've been partnering with the Center for, I think is it Art and Photography, Photography and Art, the folks in Wisconsin. and they came out and did a great exhibit. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So it's nice seeing these partnerships and this outreach with other entities. We got a new tree for Polar Express, and so trying to up our game with that venue, that operation. And then the really big project is the pavilion. This was an open air pavilion, and it probably was built 10 or 15 years ago. And we're enclosing that with doors, securing it, and then it's going to get a big screen inside and some heating this winter. Incidentally, the Colorado Railroad Museum, an odd fact, for Thomas and Polar Express, we employed more actors in 2021 than any other theater in Colorado. And that expresses the nature of the entertainment industry coming out of COVID. So we keep a lot of folks busy and employed with those events, not just the Railroad Museum people. So what's happening? What's next? We've got 491 back in service. There was some cylinder work that occurred on that locomotive last year, and it's moving strong and sounding great. We're working, we've just established a permanent restricted fund to endow the continued maintenance and operation of the locomotives. Those of you that are familiar with the museum industry and steam operations, this is a big deal. It is no small feat to keep these locomotives operating. And the notion that we have 3 operating steam locomotives at the Colorado Railroad Museum in 2023, actually there's 2 because 346 is in the shop right now. But that's something. Who would have thought even 10 years ago? It's really when they had the 20s coming out party and we had 3 operating engines there, it was just crazy. We continue to focus on paint and upkeep of all the artifacts. There are over 100 pieces of rolling stock there. And so the CNS Caboose 1009 got some new end platforms and some paint last year. And the 280 coach, it also got new end platforms and some paint. This is one of the 3 objects that's owned by the city of Boulder. And there was a piece on the narrow gauge discussion forum asking about those. We have, it took a little bit of work to wake up the folks at the city of Boulder, but we've opened a conduit with them. We've revisited the lease agreement between the city of Boulder and the Colorado Railroad Museum. There is a short extension, and we're renegotiating the lease and clarifying the maintenance responsibility. The city is very, they acknowledge that the museum is a great custodian for these artifacts and that it's the right place. And so I believe that for the time being that these will safely stay at the museum. And our objective is that they'll stay here forever, if it's possible to stay forever. We're continuing to repaint. The kitchen car here was repainted. We've also repainted the Denver and Intermountain caboose. And then I know that the 96 car just got repainted, and we're preparing the 111, this Colorado Midland observation car for restoration. And each of these, you should know, there's a path, and we're working with the museum and the staff to sort of track the identification of the item for restoration, doing some of the background research, soliciting funding and matching grants for the work, and then getting the grants approved, lining up all the funding, getting the materials, and then making sure we got a track in the roundhouse to make sure the work can occur. So these aren't things that we suddenly decide, oh, let's move this in the roundhouse. It's a study, a process. Some other objects, not necessarily narrow gauge. We got the Rio Grande GP30 got repainted. It's looking spectacular, and it's been moved to where this coach was, where the observation car was. And I know the water tank is going to be repainted here in the next couple months. Programs are really important. They've constantly got a series of programs for youth out there, and that's imperative because we need to make those new rail fans and new supporters. We're working on train rides and special opportunities. If you haven't been out for Rails and Cocktails, Colorado Crossings, they're just all super events. If you are not from the area, try and come by when those are occurring, because they're after hours, there's some special access, and there's invariably something fun happening. And the museum's got a lot of community gatherings. They are intimately involved with the Golden Civic Foundation. They get funding from that group. And we are very cognizant of trying to take care of our neighbors. We create smoke and steam and noise, and that's not always something that somebody that bought a house next door appreciates. And so the last year, actually, the museum hosted an event just for the neighbors, and it actually turned into something of a block party. That's very critical as we continue to expand the operation, invite all these outsiders onto the property. Looking forward, we have a YouTube channel. If you haven't seen those events on YouTube, Paul and the crew try and feature different objects, and it's a great way if you aren't in the Denver area to be part of the museum and learn about the project. If you're a modeler and you're interested in researching a particular vehicle and it's at the Railroad Museum, search YouTube. You might find out a little something that you need to know for your modeling project. The social media presence is expanding, and Paul here is doing a great job reaching out into the larger media with the intent of making events at the museum known, as well as just getting general visitation. Colorado Crossings this year, we wanted to really celebrate Beebe and Clegg, and this was a tie-in with the Center for Art and Photography there in Wisconsin. They brought several folks out. We did a presentation, and there was actually an anniversary run, an emulation of the train across the Rio Grande Southern. The director and assistant director look reasonably close to Beebe and Clegg, and they dressed up in suitable attire and rode the business car around the loop pulled by 20, and it was a really fun event. I'm sure you saw some photos of that. And we're always hoping as we build these restoration projects, we're hoping, for example, with the 111 to talk about the wildflowers excursions on the Colorado Midland. We're trying, every time we do something, we're trying to tie it back to a story and some way that we can make it accessible to the general public and interesting. This year in 2023, the 15-year overhaul for 346 has started. That's scheduled for completion in 2024. Expect to see that locomotive back in steam. We're getting a protective coating. All these objects, it's really tough. The Colorado sun is very harsh. Those UV rays really take a toll on the painting. And so we've repainted CB&Q 96, and we're embarking on the construction of a canopy. And that canopy's designed so it'll cover this car and the next car down, and be able to be expanded as we acquire more equipment. And the idea is that there's a platform and we can have access so folks can visit and see these important pieces of equipment, and not necessarily get inside, but where it's appropriate, get inside, as well as protect them from the elephants. We are working on extending an accessible paved walkway to the roundhouse and making that a place that's more visually accessible for visitors. It is essentially an industrial floor. We're doing heavy work there, and so we want to make sure that it's convenient and safe and accessible to see the activities that are taking place. And then I shared we're doing adding radiant heat to the pavilion, and we're putting a big video wall up there. And we've already used the video wall for the presentation for the Beebe and Clegg show, and it was really super seeing all those historic images in a large format and a great screen. We're adding some toilets there, and that's a key thing because I like to say I'm an architect professionally, and we encounter a lot of buildings that they're pre-fax machine, they're pre-internet, pre-ADA, and all of that is true of the old museum building, and we really need to get some new toilets so we can take down the toilets in the existing museum building and improve those. And then the big one I shared, we're revisiting a lot of the fundamental governance documents, and we're doing some strategic planning because we want to plan where the museum's going to go. We currently have the 10 acres inside the loop in some space south of 44th where there's some parking that occurs, but we need more space. You can see from this photo that the existing museum property is really jammed up. You got lots of gear, and there's still lots more work to do to collect and preserve. And so we want to think big, and probably you can plan on hearing plans to expand, buy more property, and all that's going to take some more money. So we're still offering living history. It's a great place to experience that. If you're in museum, if you're in Golden, please visit the museum. If you're not a member, please become one. If you live around here, please volunteer. We welcome the volunteers. They have onboarding sessions all the time. Make a donation to the Locomotive Endowment. That's how we keep that stuff running. And please consider including the museum in your estate planning. And with that, I'm happy to open the field for questions.